April 8, 1943, at 27,000 feet above Caen, France. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermichen's smirk remained, visible even behind his oxygen mask as he watched the awkward silhouettes laboring toward his formation through the crystal clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. The 26-year-old ace of Jagdgeschwader 54 observed the American fighters making their first combat appearance over occupied Europe. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he radioed to his wingman, barely able to contain his laughter at the sight of the bulky Republic P-47 Thunderbolts straining to gain altitude. Below, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group climbed in tight formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engines laboring under the aircraft's 7-ton weight. To German pilots, accustomed to the sleek lines of Spitfires and the nimble agility of Soviet aircraft, these rotund American machines appeared almost absurd. Barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse-style canopies, stubby wings that seemed undersized for their bulk, and propellers larger than anything in the Luftwaffe's inventory gave them an almost cartoonish look. What Hermichen did not yet realize, and what none of the Luftwaffe pilots circling above could have foreseen, was that they were witnessing the arrival of a machine destined to dismantle Germany's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would evolve from objects of ridicule into instruments of terror. Their 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns delivering a fearsome soundtrack in German skies. The mathematics of destruction was embedded in those wide wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, enough to shred a bomber in half in under 2 seconds. The transformation began that morning in April, when Major Donald Billy, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation maneuvering for attack. A former Eagle Squadron veteran who had recently transferred from RAF Spitfires, he understood something his men had yet to grasp. Surviving in a P-47 demanded abandoning conventional air combat thinking. The Thunderbolt represented a radical shift in fighter design, while German engineers focused on lightweight interceptors optimized for climbing and turning. Republic Aviation had created a high-altitude juggernaut that leveraged mass, power, and firepower to rewrite the rules of aerial engagement. Among the 56 American pilots spread across the skies of France that morning were future legends, men who would become aces, whose names would strike terror into the Luftwaffe. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an untested machine, confronting the world's most experienced fighter force. The Germans had been in near-constant combat since 1939, veterans of campaigns in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans, 0 days in combat. This is the story of how industrial logic triumphed over tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality combined to produce overwhelming superiority, and how German pilots' laughter turned to panic when they discovered what synchronized Browning machine guns could do at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born out of a crisis in June 1940. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Corps, a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's finest. Kartveli's response was more than an interceptor. He created a monster that redefined possibility. "It will be a dinosaur," he told his design team, "but one with good proportions." The XP-47B prototype first flew on May 6, 1941, leaving everyone who saw it astounded. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. Its massive turbo supercharger system, with complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave the aircraft a uniquely pregnant look. Test pilots approaching it for the first time asked the same incredulous question. "This thing actually flies?" Not only did it fly, it excelled, particularly at high altitude. Powered by the 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, it dominated the sky in a way no aircraft before it had. producing 2,000 horsepower. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine allowed the P-47 to sustain full power at 27,000 feet, altitudes where German fighters struggled to breathe. Its turbo supercharger, driven by exhaust gases, delivered near sea-level performance in the thin air of the stratosphere, where conventional superchargers would falter. Major Hubert Hub Zkay, commanding the 56th Fighter Group during training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially detested the aircraft. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit lost 18 pilots and 41 planes in training mishaps. The P-47 proved deadlier to Americans on the ground than the Germans would be in combat for months. It was prone to ground loops on landing, torque rolls on takeoff, and dove with such ferocity that pilots encountered compressibility, controls locking as shockwaves formed over the wings. Yet those who mastered it discovered something remarkable. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would go on to claim 27 victories and become one of America's top aces, described his first flight as akin to strapping oneself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable, he said. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. Initial combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German expectation. The P-47s couldn't match Focke-Wulf 190s in turning fights, nor could they climb as rapidly as Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Their handling at medium altitudes was cumbersome, leaving Luftwaffe pilots confident they could exploit these deficiencies by attacking from below and forcing turning engagements, where agility outweighed firepower. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first engagement. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets masquerading as warriors. Statistics initially seemed to vindicate German confidence. During the first month of operations, American units lost 14 Thunderbolts, while claiming only 3 confirmed German kills. Observing from their Spitfire squadrons, RAF pilots quietly suggested the Americans might rethink their choice of mount. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the spacious cockpit. But something crucial escaped German intelligence. The P-47s that were downed had often absorbed extraordinary punishment before falling. On May 4th, one aircraft returned from a mission riddled with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have shredded a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable liquid cooling systems, shrugged off hits that would have immediately disabled a conventional fighter. Even more consequential, when P-47 pilots did manage to bring their guns to bear, the results were devastating. The Thunderbolt's weapons created a convergence zone of destruction that Luftwaffe pilots had never encountered. Unlike early war fighters, equipped with rifle-caliber guns or limited ammunition cannons, the P-47 could maintain continuous fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The moment that began reshaping German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lazo, France. It involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron and an engagement that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from an escort mission when they were ambushed by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Hauptmann Heedmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a textbook attack, diving from the sun with a decisive speed advantage. Johnson, positioned at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire, and his aircraft suffered catastrophic hits in the opening seconds. 20-20mm cannon shells tore across the fuselage. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed the cockpit, the engine cowling was ripped away, and fire ignited behind the instrument panel. Wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, Johnson attempted to bail out, only to discover the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, fusing it shut. Trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet, he faced what seemed like certain death. What happened next defied every expectation of combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through an oil-smeared windshield, an engine barely running and violently shaking, and controls that responded only sporadically, Johnson managed to stabilize the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 kept flying with damage that would have reduced almost any other fighter to a tumbling wreck. Then the situation escalated. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, piloted by an unknown aviator from 2JG-26, spotted the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at under 170 miles per hour. Historical records have never definitively identified this pilot, though several candidates have been suggested from German combat reports of that day. What followed became one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare. History. The German pilot maneuvered behind Johnson's P-47 and unleashed his 20 meters, cannon and twin 13mm machine guns. With no means of evasive action, Johnson huddled behind his armor plate, praying. The Thunderbolt absorbed the full cannon barrage. Then the attacker repositioned and fired again, this time relying solely on his machine guns. When his cannon ammunition was exhausted, he drew alongside, staring in disbelief at the battered aircraft. Johnson could clearly see the pilot's young, blonde face, which shifted from confidence to confusion, and then to something bordering on fear. The German emptied the rest of his machine gun rounds into the Thunderbolt. Still, it held together. He pulled up alongside once more, shook his head in apparent amazement, offered an informal salute, and peeled away, likely out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 finally landed at Manston, the engine failing as it rolled onto the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after 200. One 20mm shell had detonated mere inches from Johnson's head. Another struck the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had sustained direct hits, control cables were partially severed, and 3 of the 4 main longerons, the fuselage's structural backbone, were pierced. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's plane sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers examining the wreckage realized they had underestimated the resilience of their own creation. German intelligence initially refused to believe reports from the Sektion, Jagdgeschwader 26. No aircraft could endure that level of punishment, but multiple pilot testimonies confirmed it. The Thunderbolt had survived everything the Luftwaffe's best fighters could deliver. By July 1943, American pilots began exploiting the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, discovered the secret through harsh trial and error. Don't try to turn with them. Don't attempt to climb at low altitude. Instead, use the aircraft's weight, its power, and its guns. What had initially seemed like a disadvantage, its massive size, became a deadly asset. In a dive, nothing could match a P-47. From 30,000 feet, a Thunderbolt could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical dive. That speed could then be converted into a zoom climb, leaving pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bard Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, which pilots also referred to as the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of traditional dogfighting, P-47 formations climbed to altitudes above 30,000 feet, beyond the effective operational ceiling of most German fighters. When Luftwaffe aircraft appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting nearly impossible. At the bottom of these dives, the heavy machine guns spoke. Surviving German pilots described it as a literal wall of lead. The concentrated firepower created an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence didn't simply fall, they disintegrated. The full impact of American firepower became evident during the August 17, 1943, dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that point. The mission revealed both the P-47's limitations, particularly its range, even with drop tanks, and its terrifying effectiveness when employed correctly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-110 destroyer aircraft positioning to attack B-17 bombers with their heavy cannon and rockets. These twin-engine fighters, heavily armed but less agile, were specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts dived from 28,000 feet to intercept. Unify's Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Bf-110s who survived, later recounted in a post-war interrogation. The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then it fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not merely shot down, destroyed. Wings ripped from the fuselage, tail sections severed, and the crew compartment shredded into a cascade of metal fragments. In a matter of 2 seconds, a Bf-110 could cease to exist. 8 Messerschmitt 100s and 10s were torn apart in under a minute. German pilots had never encountered such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, amounting to nearly 900 pounds of ammunition. At the convergence distance, typically set around 300 yards, the ballistic paths of all 8 guns intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet across. Anything caught within that zone faced 100 projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a testament to American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon loads, typically 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could sustain fire for over 30 seconds. The standard combat load combined armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and standard ball rounds in patterns designed both to destroy and to ignite. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gaby Gabreski, who would become America's top ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect vividly. When you hit them with all 8 guns, they don't just go down. They explode. I saw a Bf-109 literally split in half. The tail fell one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never even knew what hit him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was confronting another terrifying truth about the P-47. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double-wasp engine maintained rated power up to 30,000 feet. German aircraft, dependent on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers, saw performance drop sharply above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, experienced this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen. Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. The BMW 801 engine, potent at medium altitudes, was gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters became sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now a seasoned combat pilot en route to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinct Focke-Wulf, adorned with elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was precise and clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along the fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute seen. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their finest, a man who had survived over 500 missions on both eastern and western fronts, could be destroyed by the Thunderbolts, what hope did the average pilot have? The German High Command immediately ordered a study of the P-47's capabilities. The report, delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943, was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Armor protection included a 3-tucker 8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, a half-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most strikingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. By January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England, completing the aircraft's transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydrostatic propeller with 13-foot paddle blades, broad enough to bite the air like enormous oars. Climb performance improved immediately and dramatically. Earlier Thunderbolts had managed a modest 2,200 feet per minute at sea level. The paddle blade variants could now achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding the climb rates of most German fighters at nearly all altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy more quickly, even in level flight. Hedman Heinzknecht of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He recorded in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We ambushed a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. Instead, they turned into us and climbed alongside us. When we tried to break off, they followed us to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and obliterated. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than enhance performance. It altered the very sound of the Thunderbolt, the deep, thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds carried for miles. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a menacing rumble signaling death from above. They began calling it the Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. Standard configurations carried 2 108-gallon wing tanks or a single 75-gallon belly tank, extending range beyond 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when fully loaded, Thunderbolts could fight effectively immediately after jettisoning tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to halt the American daylight raids. But reaching them meant flying through the P-47 escort screen, a deadly proposition. German pilots developed a grudging respect, bordering on fear for the big American fighters. Major Georg Albrecht G.A. Roll, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, though he was badly wounded. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun." Someone laughed and said, "Here come the flying pigs." Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters instantly, reduced to burning wreckage. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured solid streams of fire. Being caught in that stream meant immediate death. Escort missions also revealed another P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters burned fuel rapidly at maximum power, the American radials cruised efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while conserving enough fuel for combat and return. As P-51 Mustangs gradually took over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly shifted to ground attack missions, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition accelerated in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine guns proved devastating against ground targets. Standard armor-piercing incendiary rounds could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, and the volume of fire could destroy soft targets within seconds. A 2-second burst delivered 160 half-inch projectiles into an area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that turned the P-47 into a true multi-role weapon. The D-25 variant could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pound bomb beneath the fuselage, a load comparable to early war medium bombers. Later versions added zero-length rocket mounts for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, witnessed P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in so low that you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming, followed by the hammering of heavy machine guns. A column of trucks simply vanished under the firepower. 20 vehicles were transformed into burning wreckage in a single pass. The psychological impact on the men was profound. They called these aircraft JBOs, fighter bombers. But the P-47s were something beyond that. They were flying artillery, delivering fire with the precision of expert snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe realized just how decisively the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, forming an almost impenetrable shield over the beaches. German pilots attempting to reach the landing zones were slaughtered. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader Nummer 21, one of only 3 German pilots to make it to the beaches that day, reported the sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolt stretched from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them or dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically obliterated German movements during daylight. The numbers were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,147 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,053 horse-drawn vehicles. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only under cover of darkness, severely hindering its ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, and experimented with new camouflage techniques. But nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made it nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 80mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While wreaking havoc over Europe, the P-47 simultaneously proved its worth in the Pacific. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's durability and range were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific theater. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th, developed tactics specifically for the Pacific environment. On October 11, 1943, he led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, personally shooting down 6 enemy planes in a single mission, earning the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, accustomed to fighting nimble but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and resilience. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who faced P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannons, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed useless. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying. Streams of heavy bullets, tearing aircraft apart. The P-47N, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity, with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This variant escorted B-29s all the way to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon. Perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47 came in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with a top speed of 540 mph, should have been untouchable. Yet Thunderbolt pilots discovered two ways to catch the jets: during takeoff and landing, when they were vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Jack Meare of the 300 Feet 2nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meare's Thunderbolt reached nearly 500 megapausecond, fast enough to intercept the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meare's guns opened up at 400 yards. Meare's report noted, the enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large sections, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not survive. The concentrated fire from 8.150 caliber guns proved far more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft. By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 mph in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to intercept jets under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, downed two Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized the aircraft's resilience over speed. The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't absorb punishment. One good burst from our guns and they come apart like paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them. The ultimate demonstration of American industrial power came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1st, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their remaining elite pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the initial attack succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot, brought to the command post, pointed at the burning planes and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brookings' response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He simply pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new aircraft. How long will it take you to replace your pilots? The smirks on the German faces vanished. Within 48 hours, brand new P-47D-40s had filled the flight line, flown in directly from depots in England. In Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders, losses they could never recover from. The Americans, by contrast, lost 134 aircraft across all attacked airfields, all of them replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,183 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island turned out one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built on empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 precisely machined components, tolerances measured to thousandths of an inch. Yet American workers, many women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision exceeding peacetime standards. Ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie used 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, with hundreds of Thunderbolts flying Dole missions. Monthly ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri alone produced 30 million rounds per month, each manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch to ensure reliable feeding. Fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal flight, up to 300 gallons in combat, with water injection engaged. By late 1944, the Ninth Air Force consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly, all shipped across the Atlantic, in tankers, themselves products of American mass production. Pilot training was equally impressive. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced programs, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight instruction before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by comparison, often entered combat with fewer than 100 hours of flight time. The quality of American training was evident in combat. Pilots arrived in Europe proficient in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding enemy strengths and weaknesses. They knew their aircraft intimately, having studied technical manuals that German pilots never received. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, exemplified this advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, and studied gun camera footage from actual combat. On my first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. In March 1945, Oberleutnant Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials. His statements, deemed too demoralizing for publication, revealed a complete reversal in German perception. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage. And courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Everything American is about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us with better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft, experienced pilots were dead or captured, and airfields were cratered ruins. Even if they had planes and fuel, German pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations, controlling every altitude from the ground to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly 1 combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook as if hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wings separated. I barely escaped. From my parachute, I watched them destroy my entire staff. 6 fighters gone in, under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete. German pilots developed what medical officers called Jabo fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing whenever Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47s. Ground troops, hearing the distinctive thunder of approaching thunderbolts, scrambled for cover, knowing survival meant immediate concealment. The final statistics of P-47 operations defied comprehension. In Europe, 3,152 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 3,315 on the ground, 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks destroyed. In the Pacific, 697 Japanese aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, 150 on the ground, 1,500 vehicles, 150 locomotives, and countless barges, ships, and installations. The Ninth Air Force, alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 230,173 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.61 kill ratio in aerial combat while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind these numbers lay the human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against Western Allied forces. Many fell to the concentrated fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training Germany could never replace. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. Captured Allied pilots were debriefed by German intelligence at Oberursel. Records from 1945 revealed the evolving German assessment of the P-47. In April 1943, the evaluation read, "Large, unmaneuverable fighter. Inferior to German types in all performance parameters, except dive speed. Machine gun armament insufficient against cannon-armed fighters. Minimal threat." By December 1943, the same files noted exceptional high-altitude performance, extreme structural strength, firepower increasingly problematic, pilots demonstrating improved tactics, assessment, significant threat above 25,000 ft in June 1944. Dominant fighter bomber, superior to all German types above 20,000 ft firepower, devastating against all target types. Structural strength makes shootdown extremely difficult. Assessment. Critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter bomber of the war. Combination of firepower, durability, and performance unmatched. Pilot quality exceptional assessment. Unsurvivable. In direct engagement. In 1985, at a reunion of former German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, ex-adversaries reflected on the P-47. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked for his thoughts. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy aircraft and laughed. We assumed the Americans didn't understand air combat, that they had built a bomber and called it a fighter. In reality, we didn't understand. The Americans weren't trying to build a European-style fighter. They built an American fighter designed around mass production, firepower, and survivability. They knew that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver overwhelming firepower would win. And they were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed as if it were falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable, visibility excellent, controls precise. A pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what impressed me most was the scale. Over 15,000 built while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one had an engine more complex than anything we produced. Yet America built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we had no chance. Those guns. They sounded like Roosevelt's piano. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe. It destroyed it. Its design embodied American industrial philosophy. Brute force engineering supported by unlimited resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. Wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount endured 12 guardian forces. Control cables were doubled throughout, with automatic backups. The ammunition system alone was a marvel. 8 separate ammo boxes, each holding 425 rounds, fed via electric boost motors to prevent jams. Guns were heated to prevent freezing at high altitudes. Each had its own charging mechanism, and convergence could be adjusted from 150 to 400 yards for maximum efficiency. Some German veterans argued post-war that the P-47 won through numbers, not quality. But combat records tell a different story. When numbers were equal, P-47s consistently prevailed. Its .50 caliber armament, often dismissed in favor of cannon, proved devastating in practice. Gun camera analysis revealed why. Cannon shells, though individually powerful, required precise aim and carried limited ammo, typically 120, 200 rounds. P-47 firepower created a probability cloud that guaranteed hits, even with imperfect aim. At normal engagement ranges, a 2-second burst sent at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, enough for destruction. The ammunition itself was exceptional. American .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds used delayed action fuses for penetration before detonation. The incendiary compound burned at 3,000 kBoz, hot enough to ignite aluminum structures. German 20mm shells, while heavier, often exploded on surface contact, causing spectacular but sometimes superficial damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight of 10,000 pounds exceeded the gross weight of some twin-engine fighters. Its engine alone produced more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war, and its guns delivered more firepower than a squad of infantry. Yet it was flown by young pilots barely out of high school, maintained under combat conditions by mechanics trained in weeks. The transformation of German opinion, from mockery to terror, occurred in under 2 years. The flying milk bottle became the Luftwaffe's most feared aircraft. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks spoke of P-47s in hushed tones decades later. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D stands among other legendary fighters. Its placard lists specifications and honors, but the story is told best by a small display. Spent .50 caliber shells and a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. Beneath it, a quote from a 1945 German interrogation reads, "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed their guns at you, and you ceased to exist. The laughter died with our comrades." The P-47 entered combat as an object of ridicule and ended the war as a weapon of annihilation. 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe under a storm of lead. German pilots mocked the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.